Patricia Patty Greene had never been one for grand gestures, but after 35 years of shaping young minds and tying shoelaces, her retirement deserved at least one proper celebration. Her daughter Emily had gone all out, sunflower centerpieces on each table, gold balloons bobbing overhead spelling out "Congrats, Patty," and her favorite old Motown tunes softly playing from the speakers. Patty stood at the edge of her backyard, soaking it all in. She was 60, but she felt grounded like a woman who had earned her peace. Her son Marcus manned the grill apron tied clumsily around his waist, focused on not burning the burgers. Grandkids were racing between tables, sticky fingers from popsicles waving in the air, the scent of fresh-cut grass and barbecue mixed in the summer air. Her husband Thomas looked oddly formal, charcoal slacks, crisp button-down, and even cologne she hadn't smelled in years. Patty thought he looked handsome, but she also found herself squinting, wondering when he had started dressing like a stranger. The cake came out just as the sun started to dip behind the neighbor's maple tree. It was chocolate with raspberry, filling her favorite. Emily carried it carefully, while Marcus lit the candles. Everyone gathered around, clapping, snapping photos. Patty closed her eyes, smiled, and made a quiet wish not for anything big. Just continued good health, maybe a little traveling, maybe some peace. Then she opened her eyes and saw the envelope. It sat right next to the cake, cream-colored and heavy-looking, with her name typed neatly across the front in a serif font she didn't recognize. Thomas stood behind it, holding a glass of wine, clearing his throat. Before Patty cuts the cake, he began raising his glass slightly. "There's something I need to share." She thought maybe it was a toast, a sweet surprise. A letter, maybe. Thomas wasn't sentimental, but perhaps retirement softened him. But what he said next silenced the backyard, like someone had yanked the plug on the music. "I've filed for divorce. These are the papers." He set the envelope down gently, like it contained a birthday card. Patty blinked. For a second, no one moved. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus took a step forward but stopped when Patty, remarkably calm, raised her hand. She picked up the envelope, turned it over in her hand like it was a riddle. She opened it slowly. Divorce papers, signed, filed, notarized. The date on the form 2 weeks ago. He hadn't even waited for the party to end. Patty set them back down beside the cake. "Well," she said, her voice even, "that's one way to say congratulations." Nervous chuckles sputtered in the air, then quickly died. Someone coughed. Her granddaughter clapped, once confused. Thomas said nothing more. He simply sat down, picked up a plastic fork, and helped himself to a piece of cake, as if he hadn't just detonated a bomb in front of their entire family. She didn't cry. Not then. Not when everyone trickled out an hour later with murmured goodbyes and awkward hugs. Not when Emily lingered in the kitchen, eyes brimming, asking if she wanted to stay over. Patty just kissed her cheek and told her to go home. She needed to think. Once alone, she brewed herself a cup of chamomile and sat at the dining table, divorce papers spread out like a broken jigsaw. That's when she noticed it, the return address. Not their house. Not even their lawyers. It was a unit at a condo development she didn't recognize. Her mind snapped into focus. 2 months ago, Thomas had mentioned a new physical therapist, back pain, from golf, he claimed. But she'd never been invited to an appointment. Nothing to watch, he'd shrugged. You'd just be bored. She'd believed him. Cataract surgery had kept her distracted. Life had rolled on. But now dots were connecting. She didn't rage. Didn't shred the envelope or toss back a glass of wine like some movie heroine. Instead, she opened her laptop and made a list. Not of what she'd lost, but what she still had: a mortgage-free house, a healthy pension, a sizable savings account, and above all, her clarity. Thomas thought she'd crumble. He forgot who he married. She had spent decades solving chaos in classrooms with nothing more than a clipboard and a sharp tongue. She wasn't going to let a man with a freshly pressed shirt and a coward's heart decide how her new chapter would begin. Let him have his big moment at the party. She was already planning hers. Patty wasn't the type to snoop. She had spent her entire adult life trusting that honesty and decency still counted for something. But trust had a shelf life, and hers had just expired the moment Thomas laid that envelope on the table beside her retirement cake. The morning after the party, she sat at her kitchen table, still wearing her nightgown and robe, steam rising from a neglected cup of tea. The silence of the house, the kind she once savored, now felt weighty, like a closed door she wasn't ready to open. She flipped back through her planner, cross-checking dates. Thursday afternoons. That had become Thomas's therapy slot. He'd say he was going to see a specialist for his back, always vague, always unaccompanied. But something didn't sit right anymore. She remembered how he'd started showering right before those appointments, how he'd spritz himself with the same cologne he wore when they used to go out dancing. Patty pulled a notebook from the drawer. She labeled the top of a clean-page timeline. Then, in neat cursive honed from decades on the chalkboard, she started writing. March 3rd, first mention of a new PT Denise. March 10th, withdraws $200 from the joint account. March 17th, therapy again. Withdraws $500, comes home late, says traffic. March 24th, another $250. New golf shoes arrived via mail. Patty didn't order them. And on it went. She wasn't trying to catch him in a lie for the sake of the lie. She needed facts, evidence, something solid that could drown out the sick, twisting suspicion that maybe she'd been blind for longer than she wanted to admit. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. Patty spent her nights clicking through old bank statements, flagged transactions, even emails Thomas had once forwarded to her by mistake, spa promotions, a jewelry store coupon. All while he snored in the guest room, now having moved his things there without a word the night after the party. He'd wake up, stretch, eat the breakfast she no longer cooked, and vanish for hours. When he came back, he was always tired, oddly refreshed, and disinterested in any conversation deeper than the weather. He acted like the party hadn't happened, like she was the one with something to explain. So she kept quiet. Played the part of the abandoned but civil wife. She packed away the decorations, returned unused paper goods, and thanked guests for coming. Behind the scenes, she sharpened her instincts like knives. One night, she went to retrieve her reading glasses from the guest room, formerly their room, and saw Thomas had left his laptop open. For a second, she hesitated. This was a line. But the line had already been crossed, hadn't it? On the screen was a calendar. Not his work calendar. This one was personal, synced to a new email account she didn't recognize. Thursdays were blocked off regularly, with just one word, D. And in the notes section, a name glared back at her, Denise. Unit 408. The return address from the divorce envelope had been Unit 408 at Briarcrest Condominiums. Her stomach turned, but her fingers remained steady. She pulled out her phone and snapped a picture. Then she backed away, careful not to touch anything else. That night, Patty didn't sleep at all. She sat on the porch swing with a blanket over her shoulders and watched the moon rise like it was waiting for her to say something. When it offered nothing, she whispered, "He thinks I'm stupid." But she wasn't. She was furious. It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the audacity, the smugness, the way he had tried to slide into a new life, like slipping into fresh bed sheets without consequence or conscience. She remembered a phrase her mother used to say when Patty was young. "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. But the third time, baby, you're dealing with a Greene." She took a deep breath, exhaled through her nose, and went back inside. Her hands didn't shake. Her thoughts were laser sharp. The plan hadn't fully formed, but she knew one thing. She would not let Thomas make a fool of her, not in private, not in public. Patty Greene was wide awake now, and she was watching. By the following Thursday, Patty had memorized every turn to Briarcrest Condominiums without needing her GPS. The address, Unit 408, was burned into her brain, as were the little clues Thomas had left behind, each one now pulsing with new clarity. He didn't even try to cover his tracks. That's what made it so insulting. He counted on her ignorance. He assumed she'd never question the man she made lemon tea for every morning for 2 decades. Well, he was wrong. She timed her drive to match his usual therapy schedule. He had left around 2:15 that afternoon in a collared polo and khakis, what she once called his leisure uniform. He didn't say goodbye, just whistled his way out the door, humming some Frank Sinatra tune, like his world was still intact. It was a 20-minute drive, give or take. Patty kept the windows rolled down, hoping the breeze would ease the heat bubbling under her ribs. It didn't. When she arrived at Briarcrest, she didn't pull into the lot right away. She kept going, made a slow loop around the block, then parked 2 streets down under a shaded sycamore. From there, she walked deliberately slowly, just another woman in sensible shoes and a cardigan out for a stroll. The complex was clean, newer construction, with that bland elegance developers loved, taupe siding, flower beds trimmed with unnatural precision. The sign at the gate said, "Active 55 plus, living community, where comfort meets lifestyle." Patty scoffed. She positioned herself near the side entrance, where a row of visitor parking spaces gave her the perfect view. And there it was, Thomas's silver Lexus, parked right in front of Building D. She didn't need binoculars or a spy kit. She just needed time. Minutes passed. She glanced at her watch, then back to the building's front steps. A rustle, a shadow. Then the door creaked open and out stepped Thomas. He wasn't alone. A woman emerged behind him, laughing too loud, her hand grazing his arm like it belonged there. She was blonde, not platinum, but bright enough to catch the sun and younger. Maybe early 50s. Trim figure, cropped white pants, flowy blouse, manicured nails wrapped around an insulated tumbler. She wore confidence, like perfume. Patty didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still, the wind brushing her hair back as she watched Thomas lean in and kiss the woman on the cheek. No hesitation, no scan of the surroundings. He looked relaxed, too relaxed. The woman unlocked her car and popped the trunk. They began unloading a couple of shopping bags, groceries maybe. Domestic, familiar. Patty couldn't help noticing how their movements were synchronized, like this wasn't their first Thursday afternoon spent playing house. And that was what shattered something inside her, not the betrayal itself, but the casualness of it. Thomas looked settled, like he had simply packed up 25 years and moved it into a condo, with younger countertops and scented candles. She turned and walked away before she could be seen. Her steps were steady, even as her heart thudded in protest. By the time she reached her car, her hands were cold. She sat in the driver's seat for a long while, staring at her rearview mirror like it might reflect some version of herself she still recognized. Her phone buzzed, a text from Emily Mom, just checking in. "You okay?" Patty stared at the screen. She typed, then deleted. Finally, she wrote, "Yes, just running errands. Love you." She drove home with the windows down again, the air whipping past her face like a cleansing current. Her thoughts were racing, but something had changed. She wasn't just suspicious anymore. She was certain, and certainty had a strange way of clearing the fog. She no longer needed to ask why. She no longer hoped for an explanation. Back at the house, she jotted down her findings in the notebook. May 18th, Thomas seen entering Unit 408, accompanied by blonde woman. Kissed, unloaded groceries, unlocked door with key. She underlined key twice. That night, she stood at the mirror examining her face. Not for wrinkles, but for something else, strength maybe. Her eyes looked different now. Not hard, but aware. Awake. The kind of look you see in women who've survived storms without umbrellas. Let him have his condo, she thought. Let him have his Thursdays. She had her truth now, and she wasn't done. Patty never thought she'd be the kind of woman who'd hire a private investigator. That was something women did in paperback thrillers or daytime talk shows, not retired teachers from suburban New Jersey. But then again, she never thought her husband would hand her divorce papers next to a chocolate cake and a singing grandchild either. The following Monday, she called a woman named Tessa Lark. The name had been passed along by a friend from her book club who'd used her during a messy family estate battle. She's sharp, discreet, and kind, the friend had whispered. She doesn't make you feel like you're losing your mind. Tessa arrived at Patty's door in jeans and a blazer, hair pulled back, voice low and deliberate. Patty liked her immediately. They sat at the kitchen table now, cleared of all signs of the party, and went over everything. The divorce papers, the mysterious Unit 408, the Thursdays, the blonde. Tessa listened without judgment, nodding occasionally, scribbling notes. "Give me a few days," she said. "I'll find out who she is, how they met, and whether there's more here than bad timing." There was. By Friday, Tessa returned with a slim folder and a small, grim smile. "Her name is Denise Caldwell." She began sliding over a photo. Patty blinked. There was the woman, the same one, who had kissed Thomas on the cheek, laughing in the late afternoon light. Age 51, divorced, no kids. She used to teach yoga at the Briarwood Community Center. You know it, Patty did. She had taken Tai Chi classes there last spring. Tessa continued. About a year ago, she began teaching a gentle yoga class twice a week. Nothing fancy. But she was popular, friendly, made house calls for private sessions, mostly seniors. Your husband signed up last summer. Patty closed her eyes for a beat. So that was it. He hadn't hurt his back. He hadn't found a chiropractor. He'd found Denise. She's not licensed in physical therapy or chiropractic, Tessa added. She does have a basic certification in yoga instruction, but nothing medical. The therapy was a cover. They've been seeing each other regularly since October. That condo, she moved in there 6 months ago. He's been spending nights. It wasn't just an affair, it was an entire second life. Patty looked at the photos. Denise and Thomas walking through a farmer's market. Denise and Thomas sitting side by side on a bench with coffee cups. A receipt for a spa weekend. Dinner reservations. Even a Christmas photo posted on Denise's private Instagram. Thomas wasn't tagged, but his hand, his ring, unmistakably rested on her shoulder. Why wouldn't he just leave me first? Patty asked the question, slipping out before she could catch it. It wasn't desperate. It was just puzzled. She'd made sacrifices, yes. But she'd been a good wife. A real partner. Tessa shrugged gently. Some people don't want a clean break. They want comfort while they transition. Patty nodded slowly. He didn't want to be lonely in the in-between. Exactly. She thanked Tessa, paid in cash, and walked her to the door. As she closed it behind her, something shifted in her chest. This wasn't a wound anymore. This was intel. And with intel came strategy. Back at the kitchen table, Patty spread everything out like a battlefield map. Photos, names, dates, receipts. She picked up a pen and drew a line between when Denise started teaching at Briarwood and the first time Thomas claimed he was going to therapy. She could almost hear his voice now. My back's acting up again. You don't need to come. It's just a quick adjustment. She nearly laughed. And now she understood why he had been so quick to file the papers. He wanted out, yes, but he wanted out clean. Quiet, quick. No confrontation. Just a signature and a handshake. He figured she'd be too stunned or too proud to dig deeper. He thought a dignified woman like Patty would rather suffer in silence than raise a fuss. He'd forgotten who she was. Patty Greene didn't cause a scene. She curated them. She spent the rest of that evening drafting a plan. Not revenge. Something more elegant. She would not scream. She would not cry. She would not tear down the house they had built. No, she would build something new with truth as the foundation. Let Thomas have his moonlit yoga sessions and his wine-soaked Thursdays. Patty had something better, the truth, the receipts, and a sharp mind sharpened by years of listening, noticing, and never, ever forgetting. The following Monday, Patty walked into the law offices of Sophia Lee & Associates with a fire in her chest and a folder full of evidence. The building was sleek, but modest, just 2 stories, brick exterior, tidy hedges framing the entryway. It didn't scream power, but it radiated competence. Sophia Lee greeted her personally in the lobby, her handshake firm and warm. She was in her early 40s, sharp suit, no nonsense. Patty noticed immediately that Sophia didn't talk down to her the way some professionals did with older clients. There was no sweetie or oversympathetic sighs, just eye contact and attention. In the conference room, Patty spread out her materials, photos, documents, timelines. She'd even included a few printouts from Denise's public yoga schedule, matching them to the days Thomas had claimed he was golfing. "I've got everything except a confession," she said, sliding the final sheet forward. Sophia skimmed the contents, with practiced efficiency, nodding occasionally. Then she looked up and said simply, "You did your homework." Patty smiled faintly. "He thought I wouldn't." "Well, he's about to learn differently," Sophia replied, tapping a pen against the folder. "Let's start by protecting what's yours." Within the hour, Sophia had already filed emergency motions to freeze the joint bank accounts. Anything with both their names on it was now locked. The pension, Patty's well-earned reward for decades in the school district, was rerouted to a new account, under her name only. Sophia explained that they'd be establishing a legal trust, solely controlled by Patty, to shield her primary assets. "You'd be surprised how many husbands try to lay claim to things they didn't build," Sophia muttered, almost to herself as she drafted the trust paperwork. Patty nodded, a bitter smile pulling at her mouth. "Oh, I'm not surprised at all." Next came the house. Legally, it had always been in Patty's name. She bought it before she and Thomas married. Back then, he was still climbing his corporate ladder, more ambition than assets. They'd signed a prenup, one of those awkward necessities everyone hoped never to use. But Patty's father had insisted. "You work too hard for what you have," he told her. "Protect it." Now that decision was paying dividends. Sophia reviewed the deed and the prenup, and confirmed what Patty hoped to hear. "He can try to argue for equity, but it's going to be an uphill battle. You brought the house into the marriage, and the prenup clearly separates your premarital assets." "And my pension?" Patty asked, already knowing but needing to hear it. "Safe, very safe. He can try to negotiate a portion, but with that clause in your prenup, not a chance." Patty exhaled deeply for the first time in weeks. The pressure in her chest loosened just a bit. Then came the more delicate work. Sophia explained they'd draft a counter-divorce petition, one that didn't just accept Thomas's filing, but challenged it. It would lay out infidelity, misrepresentation, and the financial misconduct Patty had carefully documented. It wasn't vindictive. It was factual. "We're not here to punish him," Sophia said, "but we are going to make sure you're not left paying the price for his midlife delusion." Patty chuckled. "That's generous of you." By the time she left the office that day, Patty felt taller, stronger. Not because the fight was over, it hadn't even begun, but because she now had tools, armor, a team. She had someone in her corner who wasn't afraid of Thomas's smug charm or his subtle manipulations. And for the first time since the envelope beside the cake, she didn't feel blindsided. When she got home, she made herself a turkey sandwich and sat at the kitchen counter, not in defeat, but in quiet triumph. She pulled out her new bank account paperwork and tucked it into the filing cabinet under personal. That night, she slept in the master bedroom again. Thomas knocked once around 11 p.m. She didn't answer. He didn't press. She heard him walk away, the creak of the guest room door closing behind him, like the final note in a song neither of them wanted to sing anymore. From her bed, Patty looked at the ceiling and whispered, "You don't get to win this time." And she meant it. By early June, Patty had what she needed. Not just confidence or legal leverage, those were already in place, but proof. Tangible, undeniable proof. Tessa, her investigator, had come through with professional precision. The photos were crisp, time-stamped, and captured just the right blend of betrayal and audacity. Thomas and Denise kissing in front of her condo, holding hands at a wine tasting, laughing over brunch on what was supposed to be one of Thomas's therapy days, and the pièce de résistance, a weekend trip to a coastal resort where they were photographed checking in under the name Mr. and Mrs. Greene. That last detail, that made Patty's jaw clench. The gall. Not only was he cheating, but he had the nerve to drag her name along for the ride. Well, not for much longer. Patty took the best photos, 6 to be exact, and printed them in glossy full color. She slid them into a cream-colored envelope nearly identical to the one he'd used to drop the divorce bomb. The symmetry satisfied her. He'd used an envelope to dismantle their life. She'd use one to reveal his. But Patty didn't rush. That was the key. Timing. Precision. She placed the envelope in the drawer by the front door, the same place she kept her spare car keys and stamps. It sat there quietly for 3 days, waiting. Like her. Biding its time. Thomas, meanwhile, seemed oblivious. He continued his routine with the casual smugness of a man who believed he was ahead of the game. He moved through the house like a guest, never engaging, never explaining. Just existing. He left early on Thursdays, came back late. Sometimes he brought back organic snacks he claimed were on sale, as if that made up for anything. Patty played the part. Civil, reserved. She didn't confront him, didn't accuse. Instead, she took up gardening again. She reconnected with her friend Margot from church. She even joined a local history club and found herself surprisingly enjoying their dry but earnest debates about early settlers and railroad routes. She filled her days with peace and her evenings with quiet fire. Then came the invitation. Patty decided to host what she called the summer appreciation dinner. No mention of the divorce, no hint of drama. Just a nice polished evening with family and friends to say thank you for the support the years and unofficially to close one chapter with a toast. She sent out embossed invitations, real ones with raised lettering and gold trim. Everyone from her retirement party was invited: Marcus and his wife Emily and the grandkids, her best friend Linda. A few longtime neighbors, even Thomas. He RSVP'd within hours. Patty smiled when she saw his reply. He probably assumed she was making peace, ready to reconcile, or worse, to surrender quietly. That she wanted to smooth things over like a proper old wife who couldn't handle a new life. Good. Let him think that. The night of the dinner, Patty dressed in a soft lilac dress with pearl buttons. Her hair, curled just enough to look effortless, framed her face with a grace that made her feel both dignified and powerful. She wore the necklace her father had given her on her wedding day because it reminded her who she was long before she became someone's wife. Guests arrived with wine bottles and good intentions. The house buzzed with conversation and laughter. No one mentioned the elephant in the room, though glances were exchanged and awkward silences hovered before each new topic. Then Thomas arrived last, as always, and not alone. Denise walked in on his arm, beaming, like she'd been invited to a gala. She wore a snug red dress and far too much perfume. Some guests blinked, others whispered. Patty greeted them both with a serene smile. "Denise," she said warmly, "so glad you could make it." The other woman stiffened for half a second, but smiled back, clearly unsure of the tone. Dinner passed smoothly. Patty played hostess with grace. But as dessert was served, lemon tartlets naturally, she tapped her glass gently with a spoon. "May I have your attention?" she said, standing. The room hushed. Forks paused midair. "I want to thank everyone here tonight," she began, "for your love, your kindness, and your presence, especially after my retirement celebration a few weeks ago." Thomas sat upright, cautious. "I received quite a surprise that day," she continued, turning her gaze to him. "But I've brought a little something tonight, too." She walked over, handed him the envelope. The same cream color, the same weight. His hands trembled slightly as he opened it. He flipped through the photos. 1, 2, all 6. His face drained of color. "That," Patty said calmly, "is what I found after you handed me those papers." The silence was total. Denise's smile disappeared. Forks dropped. A few people gasped. Patty turned to the group. "This isn't about revenge. It's about truth. And sometimes the truth deserves a spotlight." Then she raised her glass. to clarity, and to never doubting your own instincts. Applause followed, uneasy at first, then strong. Thomas sat frozen. Denise was already reaching for her purse and Patty. She sat back down, took a bite of tartlet, and smiled. 3 weeks after the first dinner imploded under the weight of betrayal, Patty sent out her next round of invitations. She called it a garden appreciation dinner, something simple, subtle, and serene. No one needed to know that it was also her stage. She just wanted them to come. Every one of them. The people who'd watched her crumble would now watch her rise. The invitations, printed on soft cream cardstock with delicate green vines etched along the border, went out to family, neighbors, old colleagues, even Thomas. Patty made sure his was hand-delivered to his office, addressed with perfect penmanship. No note inside, just the invitation. She knew him well enough to predict how he'd read it: a white flag, maybe even an attempt at reconciliation. And, true to form, he RSVP'd within 2 hours. Gladly attending, he'd written beneath the typed line, a flourish of his old signature. She imagined he felt proud, perhaps smug. Imagined him telling Denise she'd finally come around. Let him imagine. Patty spent the next week preparing. She rented a tent for the backyard, hired a local caterer who specialized in summer fare, and even booked a jazz trio that could play soft background music. She chose every detail with intent. The menu featured her favorites: rosemary, chicken sweet corn, salad peach cobbler, and lemon tartlets for dessert, of course. It was going to be elegant, effortless, and unforgettable. When the day arrived, the weather played along: clear skies, a warm breeze, and the scent of freshly cut grass lingering in the air. Patty wore a pale green dress that flowed like water, her silver hair pinned back in soft waves. She greeted each guest personally, thanking them with genuine warmth and a gentle touch on the arm. People mingled easily, sipping white wine and catching up on gardening woes and local gossip. No one mentioned the party 3 weeks prior, but the memory hung in the air like static. Everyone remembered. Thomas arrived fashionably late. Patty spotted him from the kitchen window as he stepped out of his Lexus, arm around Denise. She was dressed in something tighter than necessary heels, sinking slightly into the grass. Her hair was too blonde, her laugh too rehearsed. They looked like they'd walked out of a brochure for poor decisions. Patty met them at the edge of the yard, smile smooth as butter. Thomas, Denise. "I'm so glad you could make it," she said, her tone so even, it was impossible to read. Denise faltered for a half second. "Thank you. Everything looks beautiful." Patty nodded. "Yes, doesn't it?" Dinner was served at sunset. Guests filled the long banquet tables, under strands of soft golden lights. Conversation flowed easily, though some eyes flicked nervously between Thomas and Patty. He played it cool, charming, even his old self, the one who could sell a story and sip wine without blinking. Then came dessert. As the trio played a soft rendition of "Georgia on My Mind," Patty stood and tapped her glass. The room quieted. "I'd like to say a few words," she began, her voice clear, confident. "This evening is about gratitude, about appreciating the people who've stood beside me, especially through recent events." Soft, knowing laughter rippled across the tables. "But there's something else I need to say," she continued, turning slightly toward Thomas, who sat halfway down the table, Denise beside him with a frozen smile. "3 weeks ago, you all watched me receive something unexpected," she said. "An envelope. A shock, a moment that could have broken me." Heads nodded. Denise shifted uncomfortably. "I didn't cry. Not then, and not since. But I did make a decision that night. If Thomas wanted to deliver news in public, I'd respond in kind." She turned to her left, where a small decorative box sat beside the dessert tray. She lifted the lid and pulled out an envelope identical to the one Thomas had used before. "Thomas," she said, walking it over, "this is for you." He took it slowly, his smile strained. He opened it. The photos slid out one by one. Him and Denise, the condo, the resort, The kiss. Gasps echoed. Utensils dropped. Denise went pale. Patty addressed the crowd. After that night, I hired a private investigator. What I found was not just infidelity, it was cowardice. But I'm not here to shame. I'm here to reclaim. She turned back to Thomas. You gave me divorce papers. Now I give you truth. And fair warning, I've filed my own papers with proper legal representation. The house mine. The pension protected. And this little performance, she gestured to him and Denise. Over. Silence. Then, slowly applause. Not out of drama, but out of respect. Thomas sat frozen. Denise blinked rapidly, gripping her wine glass like it could save her. Patty lifted her own glass. To fresh starts, she said, and to never underestimating a quiet woman. The toast was met with cheers. Thomas didn't stay for dessert. The silence that followed Patty's final toast could have swallowed the whole evening. Even the jazz trio had stopped mid-note, the saxophone's last breath hanging like mist over the stunned crowd. Glasses hovered mid-air, forks stayed frozen. 100 eyes fixed on Thomas, whose lips parted slightly, as if searching for a response that wouldn't come. Denise stood first. Her face had gone the color of skim milk, and tears welled in her eyes, betraying the steely poise she had worn since stepping into the yard. She pushed back her chair, knocking it slightly askew. No words, no explanation, just a quick swipe of her hand across her cheek and a quiet, "Excuse me," before walking briskly toward the gate. Patty didn't move. She let her go. Thomas finally found his voice. "Patty, can we please not do this here?" She turned to him, calm as ever. "Do it, Thomas. Speak the truth, or finally give the people who love me the respect of honesty." He stood, tried smoothing his blazer, like that might fix the crumbling world around him. "We can talk privately. This isn't appropriate." Patty raised a brow. "Appropriate? Like handing your wife divorce papers during a retirement celebration." A soft collective murmur of support rippled through the guests. Thomas looked around, realizing the tide had turned. This wasn't the private humiliation he thought he'd orchestrated. This was Patty's show now, and she had an audience that believed her. "Patty," he said again, voice lower now, less sure. "You're blowing this out of proportion." She took one step closer, holding his gaze. "No, Thomas. I'm giving proportion to something you tried to hide. And while we're here, let me be crystal clear. I've filed for divorce. With counsel. With evidence. And unlike you, I'm not trying to sneak out the back door. I'm walking through the front. Head held high. That did it." Her son, Marcus, stood from the far end of the table and clapped once, then again. The sound echoed until Emily joined in, tears in her eyes, but a grin on her lips. One by one, others followed, neighbors, colleagues, even Patty's quiet cousin Irene, who rarely spoke above a whisper. They applauded not because of spectacle, but because they saw something rare, a woman reclaiming her dignity in real time. Thomas stood there, blinking, hands twitching at his sides. "You're humiliating me," he mumbled. Patty's smile was soft but sharp. "No, Thomas. You did that all by yourself. I'm just returning the favor with better lighting." He stared for a beat longer, then turned and followed Denise's path out the gate, not even looking back. When the dust settled, the trio resumed playing soft now, like a lullaby for something sacred. Patty sat again and Emily came to her side, wrapping her arms around her mother's shoulders. "Mom," she whispered. "I am so proud of you." Patty squeezed her hand. "It's about time, sweetheart. About time I remembered who I was." Guests approached one by one, offering hugs, words of encouragement, nods of deep respect. No one asked nosy questions. No one tried to dissect the drama. They all knew this wasn't about gossip, it was about justice. Later, after the guests had thinned out and only close family remained, Marcus sat with Patty on the patio steps. He passed her a cup of herbal tea and stared up at the stars. "Did you always know?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I ignored the signs, the small things. the quiet withdrawals. But once I saw that envelope at the party, something shifted. He nodded. I don't know how you kept it together. I didn't, she said softly. Not at first, but I realized I could cry over what he did, or I could build something new. I chose me. Emily joined them, plopping down barefoot on the grass, cheeks flushed with admiration. You've inspired all of us, you know. You didn't just stand up to him. You stood up for yourself. Patty looked at her children, grown now with lives of their own, yet still orbiting her, rooted in her example. And for the first time in months, she felt something unexpected peace, not just from surviving the betrayal, but from knowing she hadn't been broken by it. She'd chosen to speak up, to act, to let the world know that she wasn't disposable. Patty Greene wasn't just a woman with a broken marriage. She was a woman reborn. It didn't take long for Thomas to show his true colors. Just 2 days after the garden dinner, Patty's phone buzzed with a message from her neighbor, Rita Girl. You seen Facebook? Patty hadn't. She rarely checked it. But when she opened her feed there, it was Thomas's name, plastered across a long, rambling post, written in the faux, regretful tone of a man trying to spin a loss into a sob story. Sometimes people grow apart, it began. And sometimes the person you thought would age gracefully with you turns out to be someone entirely different. I never meant to hurt anyone, but I was emotionally abandoned long before I filed those papers. I just wanted peace. I deserved happiness. We all do. Patty rolled her eyes so hard she nearly saw her spine. But it didn't stop there. The comment section lit up with sympathy from a handful of his old college buddies, plus 1 or 2 ex-coworkers who clearly hadn't been at the garden dinner. One post read, "Some women go off the rails after retirement. Guess she couldn't handle being replaced." Another said, "Damn Tom, you okay?" Sounds like she snapped. For a brief moment, Patty felt the sting, the cheap shots, the rewrites of reality, the age-old weapon of calling a strong woman crazy when she won't stay silent. But it passed, quickly, because Patty had something they didn't fax, and she wasn't the only one tired of the narrative. Her daughter Emily jumped into the comment section like a lioness. "My mother gave this man 25 faithful years and built a life from the ground up. He gave her divorce papers on the day she retired. If anyone deserves peace and happiness, it's her." Marcus chimed in next. "You want happiness, Dad? Try honesty first." Patty didn't engage. Not publicly. She didn't need to. Her kids, her friends, even some of her former students, rallied without being asked. And she had other battles to win, real ones. By the following week, Thomas's lawyer sent a notice he was challenging the prenup, claimed he hadn't fully understood it at the time of signing, that it had been rushed, that he'd contributed emotionally and physically to the home, and deserved part of the equity. He also hinted at something more insidious, that Patty's recent public displays could point to emotional instability. A veiled attempt to question her mental health. Patty took the letter straight to Sophia, who didn't even blink. "This is typical," she said, flipping through the pages. "Men like him don't like being embarrassed. So now he's going to play victim." "He wants to flip the script," Patty muttered. "He wants to rewrite the ending," Sophia said. "But don't worry, I've got the pen now." They filed a countersuit complete with the prenup, her full financial documentation, and a request for the judge to formally recognize marital misconduct, namely his extramarital relationship with Denise, backed by photographic evidence and detailed logs. A few weeks later, they were in court. Patty wore a tailored navy pantsuit and soft pearl earrings. She carried herself with poise, greeted the clerk politely, and sat with her hands folded. Across the aisle, Thomas looked ragged. Denise was nowhere to be seen. His lawyer fumbled through opening remarks, attempting to paint Patty as unbalanced, overly reactive, and emotionally unpredictable since the divorce began. He leaned into phrases like volatile conduct and excessive response. Then Sophia stood. Calm, direct, and precise. "Your Honor, my client received divorce papers during a family gathering." She responded not with emotional chaos, but with documented legal precision. What she has demonstrated is not instability. It's clarity. She handed over the file bank statements, the prenup, the photographs, and the new trust documentation. The judge flipped through, occasionally raising an eyebrow. Then, after what felt like an eternity, he closed the file and turned to Thomas's side. "Mr. Greene, you signed this agreement with legal counsel present. You made no objections for over 2 decades. There is no merit to your claim. The prenup stands. The home remains in Mrs. Greene's name. The pension is hers alone." Patty sat perfectly still, not smug, not gloating, just still, solid. Thomas didn't speak. His face reddened, his shoulders sank, and whatever story he had been telling himself cracked in two. As they left the courtroom, he tried to catch up. "Patty, wait, can we?" She turned only once. "You've said enough, Thomas. Good luck with your truth." And she walked out. Her house, her pension, her name, still hers, but more than that, her dignity. 6 months had passed since the final hearing, and Patty Greene no longer woke up with her chest tight or her heart racing. The storm had passed. The silence that filled her house now wasn't the heavy, uncertain kind. It was the comforting hush of peace, of a life finally lived on her own terms. The garden had never looked better. Patty had spent the early spring replanting everything Thomas used to scoff at wildflowers, lavender heirloom tomatoes in crooked rows. She let the plants sprawl a little, grow their own way, the same way she was learning to. One sunny Saturday in August, she hosted a post-divorce gathering, not a pity party, not a look-at-me-now celebration. Just a modest afternoon with music, food, laughter, and of course, lemon tartlets. Her favorite since childhood. The tartlets had never been Thomas's thing. He used to grumble about their bitterness. But now they were hers, and their tangy sweetness was a victory all on its own. The backyard buzzed with warmth. Emily was there helping set out the serving trays. Marcus flipped veggie burgers, while his kids dashed around with paper pinwheels. Her neighbor Margot brought over a tray of deviled eggs, and someone connected their phone to the portable speaker playing Ella Fitzgerald. As Patty stood at the edge of her yard, barefoot on the grass, she realized she felt exactly as she looked free. That feeling carried her to the farmer's market the next morning. She didn't need anything in particular, just wanted the stroll. The colors, the smells, the life. She lingered near a tomato stall, squinting at a pile of odd-looking ones labeled Brandywine. A man stood beside her looking equally lost. "Those the kind that taste like sunshine or the kind that turn to mush in a day?" he asked. Patty turned startled, then amused. He was maybe early 70s, wearing a soft linen shirt, glasses slightly fogged from the morning heat, and a half-smile that belonged in a paperback romance. "I think those are the sweet ones," she said. "But you've got to eat them fast. Like joy doesn't wait around," he chuckled. "I like that. Name Sam." "Patty," she replied. "Nice to meet a fellow tomato wanderer." They chatted for 10 minutes about produce bees and how the coffee stall always ran out too soon. He was a retired music teacher, newly widowed, and had moved back to town to be closer to his daughter. His eyes were kind, his humor dry and effortless. Before she left, he asked if she'd be back next week. "Every Sunday," she said with a smile. They started meeting there regularly. No big dates, no declarations. Just coffee conversation and slow walks between baskets of peaches and bundles of sage. One weekend, he brought her a small potted plant, a mint sprig, in a chipped blue ceramic cup. "Said it reminded me of you," he shrugged. "A little wild, fresh, stubborn in the best way." Patty laughed. "I'll take that." It felt good, easy, like exhaling. A few weeks later, she invited him to her next gathering, just a casual evening of drinks and jazz in the backyard. She didn't make a fuss about it. He showed up with a bottle of wine and a small bakery box. Inside were lemon bars. He grinned. Figured I'd try to match your tartlets. That won everyone over instantly. Emily nudged her with an eyebrow. Marcus clinked glasses with him. Even Margot gave him the once-over and nodded in approval. Later that night, as the last of the guests trickled out and the candles flickered low, Patty and Sam sat together under the arbor, sipping tea and watching fireflies dance across the grass. "You think it's strange?" she asked softly. "Starting something new at this age?" He shook his head. "I think it's brave. Most people just stop reaching." "You didn't," she nodded, feeling the truth of that deep in her chest. As the clock ticked past 10, Sam kissed her on the cheek and promised to call tomorrow. When he left, she didn't feel lonely, just light. Back inside, she curled up in her favorite armchair, a plate with a half-eaten lemon tartlet resting on the side table. She looked around at the house, the same walls, same windows, but filled, now with new laughter, new plants, music she actually liked. Her things. Her life. She picked up the tartlet, took a bite, and let the citrus bloom across her tongue. Bright, sharp, alive. No, she didn't regret the end of her marriage. Not anymore. What she regretted was how long she waited to begin. She didn't just survive Thomas's betrayal. She outgrew it. And that, she realized, was the sweetest thing of all.